The New Testament reading is Acts, chapter 9, beginning with the 36th verse. Now there was at Joppa a disciple named Tabitha, which means Dorcas. She was full of good works and acts of charity. In those days she fell sick and died. And when they washed her, they laid her in an upper room. Since Lydda was near Joppa, the disciples, hearing that Peter was there, sent 2 men to him, entreating him, "Please come to us without delay." So Peter rose and went with them. And when he had come, they took him to the upper room. All the widows stood beside him, weeping and showing tunics and other garments, which Dorcas had made while she was with them. But Peter put them all outside and knelt down and prayed. Then turning to the body, said, "Tabitha, rise." And she opened her eyes, and when she saw Peter, she sat up. And he gave her his hand and lifted her up. Then calling the saints and widows, he presented her alive. And it became known throughout all Joppa, and many believed in the Lord. And he stayed in Joppa for many days with one Simon, a tanner. This is the word of God for the people of God.
Mark, thank you for this reading. I've always loved this story of Tabitha, Dorcas. This is always going on in the Bible. You have to watch out for it. People have an Aramaic name, then now they're in a Greek world, so their name becomes a little bit different. Saul becomes Paul, Tabitha becomes Dorcas, and so on. The name means gazelle, by the way. What a cool name. And the story of Dorcas was the subject of what I think may have been the greatest sermon I have ever heard in my life. The sermon was preached in Swahili. I know one word of Swahili, and I'm not sure it occurred in that sermon. But it's still a great sermon. It was preached by this woman on the screen named Lena. Let me tell you a little about Lena. 7 years ago, Lisa and I went to Kenya to visit our Zoe ministry there. We had a team there just the past 10 days. They returned on Thursday night of this week. I don't want to tell you about Zoe if you're not familiar with it. It's just the greatest thing ever. For a long time, Christians thought there are a lot of orphans in Kenya. We need to build orphanages for them to live in, and Christians did. And kids lived in orphanages, and they grew up, and then when they aged out of the orphanage, they had nothing. But they've been cared for while they were children. Zoe has a better idea, which is you take kids when they're orphans, when they're 13 or 14, and you give them education and support and career training and microloans and all the stuff, so that by the time they're 17 or 18, they're business owners, they're taking care of their families, they're employing people, they're ready for the rest of their lives. Absolutely amazing. Lena was one of these. She was 17 when we took this photo of her 7 years ago. She's a very successful businesswoman now, has a big seamstress business in a couple of towns. She owns a couple of convenience stores. She's done really well. Her relationship to Dorcas is, Dorcas was the seamstress, and so is Lena. But also, she's the one who preached maybe the greatest sermon that I've ever heard. They actually offered for me to preach that day. They said, "Hey, you should preach to the people." They don't know English, and I'd rather hear somebody else. So Lena preached, and we knew it was on Dorcas because they read the Bible passage in English. Then she stood up and started preaching, and it was absolutely scintillating. She started by, she was a seamstress, so she had hung up on a little clothesline some of her wonderful goods that she had made, and she was stroking them and smiling, but then she got sick and she fell down on the floor. I was going to reenact this for you. I actually practiced it yesterday. I came in here and I fell down on the floor, and it hurt and it was hard to get back up. So I thought, I'll just have you imagine this. So she's on the floor, and then everybody was in on the sermon. The widows of Joppa came. These are other women who were part of the Zoe program, and they came, and they all brought something that Dorcas had made for them. as we heard in the story. So lovely. And they were weeping and wailing over her. And then Peter comes in the room. He lays hands on her. She jumps up and she's alive and everyone is celebrating. It was just the coolest sermon. It was so moving. I can't tell you how great it was. The story of Dorcas, it's really a story of how, in the presence of God and in the work of the church, there's new life when there seems to be no hope. I did a funeral yesterday in Greensboro for a friend. We talked about new life that she had discovered in her life and caused to happen in her life, and then also the promise of eternal life now that she is gone. I hope you heard in Mark's reading Luke's description of Dorcas. It says that she lived a life full of good deeds. She lived a life full of good deeds. It doesn't say she was very successful and she hosted a lot of nice parties and had a great many friends and never broke the law and got in any kind of trouble. And she went to a great school, and none of those kinds of ways we normally assess people at the end of their lives. Instead, Luke simply says she lived a life full of good deeds. And when she dies, who comes? Now, the way she's described in the story, we assume that she is a person of some means. When she dies, who comes to grieve her death? It's the widows. And when you and I hear that, we think, okay, these are women whose husbands have died. In that ancient world in Joppa, a widow would have been, that's like the poorest of the poor on the scale of things. They had no property rights, no money. They were totally dependent. It meant they had no children who could care for them in their old age. They were destitute. It was the destitute and the poor who came and grieved the death of Dorcas. And it says that they brought tunics and other things that she had made for them. It's so lovely. The Greek says actually it implies that they were wearing what she had made for them when they came. Like, I love that. And I try to think about, people wearing things that maybe I gave to them or something. I told some of you this story a while back. It still moves me in this connection. That is, years ago, I was on our conference's Board of Ordained Ministry. And we interviewed people to see if they passed, and we ordained them or not. And there was one woman, she's just fabulous, holy, wonderful, humble, joyful. And in the course of the interview, we stumbled into this thing that I knew about her, and I asked her to talk about it. And she has this habit that, if she's somewhere and somebody says, I love those earrings, she just pulls them off and gives them to you. Somebody says, I love that sweater, if she can, she takes it off and gives us I love your purse. She takes her contents out, she gives them the purse. Like, it's really cool. And I was moved by this. So came out of the interview, we had a break, I needed to go to the bank. So I walked across the parking lot to the bank. I go up to the bank teller, and this guy looks at me and he says, I love that tie. I was like, ow. I do too. I pulled it off, I gave him the tie, he was so happy. And I went back in the bank 3 or 4 days later, he's wearing my tie. And I loved the tie on him more than I'd ever loved it on me. That was just one of the greatest things. And it reminded me of a time I went to Lithuania on a mission trip. And we were packing to come home, and I had carried one too many bags. It was in the winter, you had to take a lot of clothes. I had all these sweaters, and I didn't want to carry the extra bag. They were good sweaters, 4 sweaters. And I just thought, I'd read about St. Francis giving his clothing away, So I thought, I'm just going to leave these sweaters here. And I was so happy that I left those sweaters there, because weeks later they would send me photos of what they were doing, and I saw these young men wearing my sweaters. And I loved seeing them in my sweaters more than I'd ever enjoyed those sweaters. They'd be sitting in a drawer or something in my house. So really cool. That happens. Wearing other people's stuff. Dorcas raises a question for us, which is, what will your legacy be when you are gone? And I'll frame that question in a particular way. At your funeral, who will come? Who will come? I conduct a lot of funerals. It's always interesting who comes. Sometimes there's a big crowd, sometimes a smaller crowd. Probably depends on your age as much as anything else. And usually who comes are really good people, and they're a lot like you. They look like you. They're a lot like you. And I'm trying to think, who would come to my funeral? When Dorcas died, it wasn't the people that looked or were like Dorcas, but it was the poor widows who came. I saw an amazing thing at this funeral yesterday. This was so moving, and it just fit this, like God must have orchestrated all of this. I went up to Greensboro to bury a woman who used to live in Charlotte. She moved away from Charlotte 15 years ago. When she was in Charlotte, we hung out together a lot, and she had a really remarkable life here. One of the things she did is she started a ministry, just as a volunteer, not as a job. She started a ministry here for Southeast Asian refugees and immigrants. And it was really cool, and she put a lot of energy into this thing, and they met in our church a bunch of times. It was great. And so she left Charlotte 15 years ago, and we had her funeral in Greensboro yesterday. When I stood up to conduct the service, I looked out at who had come. There was a pretty good crowd, and I would say a third to a fourth of them were Southeast Asian refugees from Charlotte who'd been kids when she lived here. And now they're grown, and they'd heard that she died, and they drove all the way up to Greensboro to be at her funeral. Who will come to your funeral? Who will come to my funeral? How do we invest in other people? Like, do you have a tide? Do you have some sweaters? What do you have? Do you have some skills? Do you know how to sew? Can you make a good souffle? You're good at decorating, or you're good at flowers, you're good at mentoring young business people. Yeah, whatever it is, like, is that for you? Or is that something that we can use to invest in the unlikely people who are not like us, those who are disadvantaged, who are, what would that look like? It'd be so interesting. I saw a photo the other day. This is amazing. I was talking to a woman, she's probably 30 now. She's having some issues taking care of her aged mother. And I knew her. She said, you know me. You knew me when I was a kid. And she sent me a photo, and the light came on in my head. She went to our South Tryon Community Church, lived over in Brook Hill at the time. And I love the photo because she is there with one of our pastors and a couple of our church members, and she has a cello. So at the time, she expressed an interest in music, and she loved the sound of a cello like we have heard today. So somebody in our church had a cello and just gave it to her, right? And we're looking at it years later. Look at that photo of the cello. And what do you have? One of the things that some of us have, a lot of us have, that matters, that can do this kind of work, is it's money. I had an interesting thing happen this week. Somebody brought up in a meeting, this is interesting, somebody remembered this. I came here as your pastor 22 years ago, and back then we used to send out, by postal mail service, this is almost prehistoric, a weekly newsletter called The Cornerstone, and it had kind of lazy got. Some of you are nodding, you remember The Cornerstone, it was great. And I was the new pastor, so somebody, I can't remember who did this, interviewed me, and then they edited it all together and put out a story about the new pastor. And one of the things that somebody remembered this week that was in that article is that I said, I will never ask church people to do something that I will not do myself. And something that Lisa and I have done all of our married life is we tithe our money to the church. And we don't do after tax and after we've been to vacation, I tithe what's left. We just tithe, just write off, pre-tax. And we include things like dividend income, and we inherit money from our parents. And this person remembered this and said, you haven't preached on that in some time. I said, I'll bring it up Sunday. Because it actually works. What I've discovered as a tithing person is that this is just so much fun. And there's so much joy in doing this. And I can't say that I regret a nickel that I have tithed. And it simplifies all the stuff, by the way. I don't have to check the church budget, or I do it for God. It's just so easy, and it's a great thing. Now, when this came up the other day, somebody said, have you really tithed all your life? I said, yeah. And I got to thinking about it myself later, and I thought, I wonder how much money that's been in the course of my adult life. Now, pastors don't make a fortune. I'm sure you know this. But we make something. And you can do the math and guess yourself, how much money has James Howell made in the 40 plus years that he has been working, and what would 10% of that be? So I did the math on this actually the other day. I admit I had about a 2-second flinch, my father came out of the grave and possessed my body temporarily. He's a child of the Depression. It was like, ooh, and I got over it quickly. And I thought about that money, and I thought, man, with that money, I could buy a house. Or with that money, I could buy a couple of nice cars. Or with that money, we could travel to Europe. And then I thought, you know, I have a house. And I have a couple of nice cars. And we have been to Europe. Then I think about, where has that money gone? That money has just gone to so many cool places. I think, you know, where your money goes when it goes into the church. I think about that scene in, the Christmas movie, It's a Wonderful Life. And they have the run on the bank because of the stock market crash in 29, I guess. And everybody shows up at George Bailey's Savings and Loan, and they're shouting, I want my money, I want my money. And George Bailey says, I don't have your money. Your money's in Joe's house. Your money's in the Kennedy's house. Your money's in 100 houses in this town. Like, I love that. Like, I want my money. Well, your money is in somebody else's house. If you contributed to our capital campaign, your money is in one of 39 houses that we built over near the airport, Plato Price Place, and there are people living in those homes. Like, I love that. Like, where's your money? It's in somebody else's house. Somebody's money is in a cello that a woman owns. My money is in Kenya, in Lena's seamstress and convenience store business. And I kind of like seeing it there than in my own bank account. That just gives me so much joy and sense of purpose in my life. And I was thinking about Habitat. It's a story, I've told this before, but I just love it. About 30 years ago, we brought Millard Fuller to Charlotte, founder of Habitat for Humanity. I really wanted to introduce him, but we thought it was better to have somebody who lived in a Habitat home to do so, so we brought Melissa up there, and it was the coolest introduction I've ever heard in my life. She didn't actually talk about him at all. Instead, Fuller was sitting down front, and she just spoke to him. And she said, Millard Fuller, you're the answer to my prayer. She said, I had a little boy, and we were living in this just shabby place, and he was depressed and was doing poorly in school and was having behavior issues. And I fell on my knees and I prayed to God, God, if you can do something to give my son a chance to be somebody, I'll do anything. I'll give up my life. I mean, I'll do anything, God, please. He said, Millard Fuller, you're the answer to my prayer. When God told you to give your money away and start Habitat, that was the answer to my prayer. I learned about this Habitat program, and I went and heard that I qualified. I went and worked on a house. I worked next to President Jimmy Carter, right over in Optimus Park. And we moved in the house. She said, when we moved in the house, my son just immediately just perked up, and he began to smile, and he was happier, and he started doing better in school. He had this confidence because we had a house. We had a roof over our head. And he's been doing so well. And she said, the other day, he said to me, Mama, do you know what I'm going to be when I grow up? And she said, no, son, what are you going to be? He said, I'm going to be a doctor. She said, Millard Fuller, you're the answer to my prayer. Do you know that song, Kumbaya, Kumbaya? And we sing, someone's praying, Lord. Someone's praying. Someone's praying, and like, what do we have that would look really good on them? Is it a tie? Is it earrings? Is it a souffle? What is it? What do we have that would look good on them? The church always does you this favor of giving you a great destination for the money that you have. You know, I've prayed earnestly with God to get my office and our sanctuary somewhere under 120 degrees. And the Lord has answered my prayer. And we have air conditioning now. It's absolutely amazing. It costs a lot of money, and it costs to run the air conditioning in here right now. All these things that look like God's doing a beautiful thing with us. It's all about grace. It's all about mercy. It's all about traveling light. So I just have the question for me more than for you, but I'll let you listen in and maybe you can think for yourself. Like, who's going to come to my funeral? What legacy am I leaving in this world? Will anybody who's destitute, marginalized, left out, will they grieve my death? Will they have something to show? Oh, this is from James. I hope and pray there's some answer to that question, to that prayer. Thanks be to God.